Chapter 18. Showdown with Su-Lynn. Thinking of the protectors made me think about the Evernatch on the other side of my computer. I accessed the Visor communications link and tried to send him a ping. It was a little frightening when nothing came back. How long do we have to be here? Blossom asked, and I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the med box, its progress bar still orange. For as long as it takes for the box to fix David, I said. Why? Because I can see a light. Now that she mentioned it, so could I. I stared at the opening we had come down, watching the slowly brightening glow that had nothing to do with the rising moon. To my relief, it wasn't blazing directly down the cave opening, and I was reminded by the crisscrossing of shadows that a thicket of bushes hid the hole from sight. When Su-Lynn opened her mouth as though to speak, I raised my hand, holding my palm out in a clear signal for her to stop. She stared at me, stared at my hand, and then closed her mouth again. She still looked on the verge of tears, but now there was a rebellious edge to her features. I made a note that I'd have to watch Su-Lynn. She was angry, and angry people didn't always act the best they could. I glanced over at Blossom, and Blossom looked at me. I might have been mistaken, but I thought I caught a quick dip of her chin as though she would support me. I really hoped I could rely on that, but decided I wouldn't until I could be sure it was there. The light swept past the top of the cave a couple of times and then moved further. We watched until all that told us the heritage was still out there was a slight brightening and then dimming, as though the beam passed over us but was focused somewhere else. When we hadn't seen it for a good 10 minutes or so, I turned to Su-Lynn. I don't mean to be rude, I said, but could we ask you for some dinner? From Blossom's indrawn breath, I guessed that hadn't come out as well as I'd hoped. So you think you can just come in here and call me sexist and then demand to be fed? She demanded. That's not what I meant, I said. Sure it isn't, she snapped back. Why don't you just use your own provisions? Because part of the plan was that we'd stop and eat at the pods so that we could be sure of having enough provisions to reach everyone. And what makes you think I'm going to cook you anything? The fact that this is still your pod and you're the host. Hostess, don't you mean? Su-Lynn asked, and then her voice turned sarcastic. Or don't you believe in that kind of thing? Has it all got to be politically correct for you? No, I said, but it's your place and your responsibility to look after your guests. Don't you lecture me on what I should and shouldn't be doing. You don't have the right. And that's when I realized she was shouting. I shot a quick glance toward the cave entrance again and saw the darkness brighten as a light passed over us. Again. Blossom followed my gaze and saw it too. She slid over to Su-Lynn and wrapped her arm around her friend's shoulders before slapping her hand over her mouth. Shut up, Sue, she hushed. Look. She pointed to the brightening glow at the mouth of the cave. Shh. Su-Lynn's eyes grew wide and she nodded. We all sat still and quiet in the dark, watching the light dance over the top of our hiding place, growing brighter and then fading only to brighten again. This time we waited for it to stay away for almost an hour before any of us dared to speak. And it was Su-Lynn who broke the silence. Fine, she said, keeping her voice to a hoarse whisper. I'll get you dinner, but only because Blossom gets cranky if she doesn't eat. Blossom snorted, and I was very careful to keep any kind of amusement from my face. Actually, looking at Su-Lynn's expression, it wasn't hard. I hadn't been forgiven for what I'd said about their treatment of Taylor. Not yet, and maybe not ever. I wondered briefly if it even mattered, and then wondered if they'd take it out on Taylor when we went to fetch him. The food wasn't anything special, but it was hot, and I was glad. I think my last hot meal had been back before I'd left to go find David. Actually, the more I thought about it, the more I was sure I hadn't had anything hot since leaving my own pod. I ate in silence, sitting back on the opposite side of the cave to Su-Lynn and Blossom, and trying to ignore the fact they weren't including me in their conversation, and the fact that their conversation was clearly about me. I could tell from the way they kept glancing in my direction, and by the way that Su-Lynn used her hand to block her words from reaching me. Whatever. I leant my head back against the wall and let myself drift into an uneasy sleep. I woke to find that someone had covered me with a blanket sometime during the night. They'd also slipped the visor from my head and set it on a nearby shelf. Light came through the cave opening, but not the kind of light we had to worry about. This was sunlight, coloured green and laced by shadows from the bushes above. I looked around the cave and discovered I was alone. This worried me until I saw that my backpack was standing beside the med box and that Dave's pack had been set neatly beside it. The only problem was that I couldn't see Blossom's pack anywhere, or a pack for Su-Lynn, nor could I see either of the two girls. Surely they hadn't gone storming off without me. And where would they go? Snapped the snarky voice in my head. Where indeed? For a moment I worried that they had gone to tell the Heritage where I was, and then I realized that the light was still on in the med box, which meant Dave was still here, which meant I was probably okay. Su-Lynn might hate my guts, but she loved Dave. She definitely wouldn't give him away to the Heritage. Besides, she was scared of the Heritage and didn't want to get eaten. Yeah, I was probably okay. Even so, I looked around the cave until I found the stick she'd hit Dave with the night before. With that in my hands, I felt a whole lot safer. I spent a few minutes prowling around the cave inspecting Su-Lynn's setup. It was pretty sweet. Somehow the Evernatch had managed to shift pretty much all of the inside of the pod into the cave. I wondered if it had done something similar to what happened to my pod when the Evernatch keeper had flown it up to hide it beside the sapphirite outcrop. If it had, that would explain why he'd said it couldn't be moved again. I sighed, picked up my visor and stuck it back on my head, and then went over to the computer terminal. My computer guy wasn't there, but Su-Lynn's guy was. Weirdest thing was he came on screen, like some sort of vid call or something. Have to say, he was really pretty. He had scales sheened in tones of blue and gold. Wow, trust Su-Lynn to luck out. I wondered if she'd ever seen him. At least it sounded like a him. Maybe it was a her and I just couldn't tell. I remembered Taylor. Not that physical maleness was going to matter much. Who are you? He demanded before I got too much further, and then another Evernatch appeared on the screen. Nice! Ist, you found her! Ist looked up at the other Evernatch, my Evernatch, since I recognized his voice, or her voice, or whatever. Hey, I said, feeling suddenly shy as I remembered some of the things I'd said to him. What's up? The Heritage, Ist began and glanced up at my guy. You tell her, Sierva. The Heritage picked up Su-Lynn and Blossom. I glanced at the entrance and then at the med box. How long have I got? I asked. Dave won't be ready to travel for another 2 days. You don't have that much time if you're to beat the Heritage to the rest of the dispersed. Dispersed? It is what we call you. Well, at least I knew they had a name for us. What happened? We thought the Heritage only travelled at night. In the early stages of the hunt, yes, but when the prey begins to move, they work around the clock. How many of them are there? First hunt is always between 6 and 8, travelling in 2 teams of 4. I'm afraid your success at evading them has brought them to stage 2 early. How long do I have to get to Su-Lynn and Blossom? Usually they collect all the dispersed they can find in a landing zone, and then they conduct a feast to celebrate. I stared at them for a moment. Evernatch expressions were difficult to decipher at the best of times, but these two were keeping something from me. I could tell because they were keeping their faces very smooth and the crests on their head hadn't twitched. Not even a little bit. What am I missing? They stared at me, and I stared back until Ist flinched, his crest giving a brief up and down flicker. Missing? Yeah, there's something you're not telling me. I waited. Neither of them said anything, and that gave me just enough time to put the pieces together. What happens to you? I asked, and this time both crests flared and their eyes widened in alarm. When they didn't answer, I tried again. Tell me, what do the Heritage do about you? Ist glanced up at Sierva. You said she was direct, he commented, but you didn't say how direct. Sierva sighed. He ignored Ist and looked directly out at the screen at me. They will hack the GGS belonging to the girls and learn that we are on this world. Before they feast, they will find this base and kill every single one of us they can find. But you're going to get out, right? You're going to be gone long before then, right? I could hear myself begging and didn't care. No matter how mad I was at these guys for getting us into the situation we were in, I didn't want them to die. They were helping us, for heaven's sake. What about the protectors? I asked, and saw Is turned a surprised look toward Sirva. You told her? Only that they existed, Sirva told him, his answer coming so fast I knew he was hiding something. Yeah, I interrupted, but have you called them? Will they come in time? Ist reached up and laid his hand on Sirva's sleeve. This time Sirva didn't ignore him. He looked down and met Ist's gaze. It looked like something passed between them, but for the life of me, I didn't hear a thing. What? I asked. What is it that you don't want me to know? We couldn't get through, Sirva said. The Heritage have jammed the satellite, and they took out our last message drone last night. Well, I said, feeling my heart start to race. Don't the Protectorate check on you? Don't they call? I watched as Sirva's eyes flickered. I'd seen that flicker before. It was the inner membrane, the clear inner eyelid, if you like, flicking across the eye, and then he blinked. I knew that look, had caused it on more than one occasion. That was the look of a stressed out lizard man, Evanach. What is it? I said, and didn't bother to try and hide the tiredness in my tones. They call, but we think the Heritage will find us before the next call is due. Then evacuate, I said, my voice coming out louder than I expected. Get out of there and hide. Go to Mitch's pod. We'll meet you there. Both Ivanach looked doubtful. What? I snapped, and Sirva had the sense to look embarrassed. Mitch is a little upset with us, he explained. He's not pleased that we have you. He looked at Ist. What did he call it? Gallivanting, Ist said. He called it gallivanting, and he said we were the most irresponsible sons of. I'm sure that's not polite. Sirva cut him off, and I almost smiled. I can fill in the rest, I assured them. So you've annoyed Mitch, and you've got a bunch of rogue redneck lizards hunting you down. They opened their mouths, but I kept on going, not giving them a chance to get a word in edgewise. The rednecks have already caught 2 of your survivors, which leaves 1 dispersed in pretty permanent hibernation and 2 more for me to find. Now tell me you got word out to the protectors about Alicia. I paused, and they both nodded, so I kept on. Good. So they know things are going pear-shaped, and they'll be a little concerned when they don't get an update. Watching their faces, I paused. Tell me they're expecting an update on the success of the advanced med box with the tremorless case. It was clear the thought hadn't crossed their minds, but suddenly they relaxed and nodded. Good, 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 I said. So all I have to do is pick up Taylor, Saeed, and Mitch, and then find you before the Heritage do, right? What do you mean, find us? Sirva asked. You need rescuing too, because you're not telling me that the reason you all have to stay in the base is because you have to make sure nothing goes wrong with our pods, and because it's protocol. From their downcast looks, I was right. Okay then, I said, let's get this straight. Once I reach Mitch's pod or mine with the others, you guys need to evacuate. Your protectors will come to see what's happened when you don't talk to them about Alicia, and we'll contact them as soon as they come looking. But you won't be able to tell. You don't have the sensors or the frequencies. Drat. Fine. What if we turn off whatever's jamming the signal? They both looked concerned. But that would put you in danger. We have to get Blossom and Su-Lynn back anyway. If the jamming thing is in the same place, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. It's more like the birds would kill you, Sirva grumbled. What are you going to do for weapons? You let us worry about that, but find out where they're based so we can get to them fast as soon as we've fetched Mitch. I hesitated, and they're not likely to start the feast without Mitch, are they? That depends on how hard he is to find and get to. That valley is reamed with sapphirite. They may not locate him. And what about you? Us? Yeah, you. Well, is your location reamed with sapphirite? No, it would cause problems with our equipment. So you're really easy to find then. They exchanged a look that said maybe they were, and then they lied to me again. Well, not really, but Mitch will be harder. Uh huh. Some of my skepticism must have shown in my face, and it sure as anything came out in my voice. They scrambled to set me at ease. It will be all right, Sierra told me. The protectors, Ist started and then shook his head. In the end, he went with Blunt. We'll do our best to stay alive until you can rescue your Blossom and Su-Lynn. As soon as you're clear, we'll evacuate to your valley. I've not marked your relocation on the map, but we won't go until you have everyone. He paused and then added, We all have our parts to play. And then he reached toward the screen and their faces vanished from view. Well, I guess I had my marching orders.